long-term recommendations for all the town buildings. The cost comparison study for which we are seeking funding is a vital, necessary component as we work towards this goal. The three components of this article in no way represent any long-term recommendations. Indeed, no long-term recommendations can even be considered until this information is available. And I'd ask you again to assist the Space Study Committee in completing their work with this modest appropriation. There are members of the Space Study Committee here. I think all of the members are here, including the chairperson, Karen Stewart. If anybody has any questions, we'd be glad to answer them for you.
Mr. Pasquale.
John A. Pasquale, 12 Hickory Lane. Yeah, I would personally like to commend the Space Committee. However, Mr. Moderator, I move that the Article 13 entitled Fund Cost Comparison Study be postponed for discussion until October town meeting. I further state that the article be modified and written to 1. Expand the scope of the study beyond the 3 items listed to include A. Long-range school locations, B. Recommended use of school-owned lands. We've got over 50 acres. 3. Involvement of the CPC and the local business in the inputs. 2. Modify the structure and reporting relationships of the present Space Study Committee. I request to give one slide.
That should take less than 5 minutes.
I felt that this was a golden opportunity to sit back and reflect for a minute, because we've been talking about the big picture, and what I didn't see was where's the long-range location of the schools. I'll ask Mr. Chuck Carucci to put up one of his slides when he comes up, and you'll see that there's an imbalance in the population where the schools are for the future, so we ought to be looking at that. There is a lot of school-owned land. I think it's a golden opportunity to look at it, because we're just sitting on it. If we're not going to use it for schools, then use it for recreation or do something with it. But the Swan Pond area and the area off of Chestnut Street, this is what you call long-range planning. Let's tie it into the package. 3, I think there definitely has to be an involvement with the CPC, because we have a master plan here. They're talking about buildings, moving things around, and that has an impact on the master plan. I went to the presentation they made, and they did a commendable job. The only problem was they never got the presentation out of their mouths before what I call the Bachelor Bash began. And that is, everybody started to protect the bachelor school. So that there put everything here that you see with the bachelor school. Number 2, the citizens, believe it or not, when I was there, put them in a tough position because they didn't trust the results. 3, for these people around the committee, and I mean all of them, whether they're the school committee or the selectmen, it was very demoralizing to their spirit. There's a lot of talented people on that committee, and boy, they didn't deserve some of the words that were said at them. And I personally am apologizing publicly for some of the citizens for what they did to them. That was called for. Existing structure...
Just a moment. Do you have a point of order?
Yes, point of order. There's some information that's on here that's very detrimental to people. And I don't feel property stuff is on here at all. There's character assassinations in here, I think should be stopped.
Just a moment. Just a moment.
I'm sorry,
Mr. Pasquale, I think that Mr. Canny's point is well taken, that these are ad hominem arguments, and therefore the chair would request that you take off your transparency. You may continue with your comments. Please remove your transparency.
Fine. I can still make a statement about Mr. Demetriou.
I wish you would not make ad personam statements, sir.
Fine.
If you have arguments to make on the issue, that will be permitted.
Fine, I'll continue. And my proposed structure was to continue having the 3 citizens with Mrs. Stewart as the chairperson, Mr. Deming, Mr. DeVoe, and take it out of the political arena of the selectmen and the school committee they're watching over. I think you ought to have a representative from the community planning. I would suggest Mr. Pierce, because he is a businessman. Mrs. Barker, again, in finance, and an outside consultant. I think you ought to form a little citizen screening board for the people with Mrs. Dolan, Mrs. Venezia, I'd be willing, or Mr. Welch. You can get whoever you want. All they would do is screen the candidates, and I think the 5 people on the committee ought to select who's going to work with them. That way they make recommendations. There's no political connection between the school committee nor the people on the Board of Selectmen, because even in these committees, they tell you everything's hunky-dory. That's not what I see going on. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
On the motion, okay, the chair recognizes this as being, regardless of the form that it has, it is in fact a motion to commit, a motion to refer the main motion under the article back to committee so that it will not be considered any further by the present town meeting, but will be considered at a future meeting. And in order to be adopted, this will require a simple majority. On the motion to commit, on the motion to remit the main motion to committee, is there any further discussion, Mr. Venezia?
With all due respect to Mr. Pasquale, some of the suggestions that he made, we've already been through. We've already concluded, essentially, that from a space perspective, that it's not necessary to build any new buildings. What we're trying to do here is make a determination before we even get into that as to whether or not we already have adequate building space to house the elementary school population for the next 10 to 15 years. We feel that we do, and that this particular study will help us determine where that space should be located. We've worked pretty harmoniously together here, and that's what we've been hearing at town meetings. That's what people want, and I think we've accomplished that. This committee was appointed by the Board of Selectmen and by the school committee. We've done a lot of work up to this point, and I think unanimously the members who are all here tonight would like to continue to finish this particular project and come up with what we think would be some very productive long-term suggestions. Again, we're asking for this modest funding because we need the money. I don't think it's going to be efficient to send this back for a reorganization of the committee. I really don't. And I would ask you to vote no on the amendment to the motion or the referral of the motion, and to vote yes on the main motion. Thank you.
Mr. Carucci.
Charles Carucci, 3 Chester Road. The Space Study Committee is a good idea. The only thing I think they left out was a little more input from the Community Planning Commission. What I have here is a little diagram of showing where the growth in North Reading is going to be for the next few years. And what you see up there, let me get my glasses. In the green are the schools that are already existing. In the yellow is town-owned land that's designated for schools. And in the other stars are the subdivisions that are going on in North Reading that will be going on. And that's where your population growth is going to be. And it's going to be around the bachelor school.
Moderator, could you remove the sign, please, so we can see the... Thank you.
Now, those 2 spots for future schools, one is Swan Pond and the other one is up on Chestnut Street. And the planning board is more than happy to work with anybody, that wants to do anything. I have no problem with the money. All I ask is that they do include the planning board. We do know where all the land is in the town. Thank you.
Mrs. Cerrone.
Mr. Moderator, I would tend to have to concur with Mr. Pasquale on one point, and that is that I do think a member or 2 from the CPC should be part of that, and I'm not sure why. I think we deliberated. I don't know what the reason was, but maybe it's because the idea wasn't brought up. But to go one step further, if you look in the article, and the idea may have been brought up, I just forget what the discussion was. If you look into the article, the first question it says is, how much would it cost to financially maintain the Batchelder School as an elementary school? It's not to say that this committee does not believe or would concur with a brand-new school in this town. We are not saying that we don't think another school is not necessary. We're not saying that growth in 5 or 10 years could mandate the construction of a new school. This study is to focus, what are we going to do with the Batchelder School? Financially, how much do we need to invest in that building to do A, B, or C? And I think with that documentation, this Space Study Committee is in a better position to inform you, the citizens and the taxpayers, based on an independent study. Now, these firms have been doing a lot of work in our town, and we have financially benefited the high school and the library. And so there's nothing more into this than ABC. And if we don't do the study, we could end up throwing a brand new elementary school in cost over the next 10 years into a building. And so I think that that's what we need to look at here.
Mr. Hernandez. Mrs. Dolan.
Colleen Dolan, 17 Strawberry Lane. Just as a point of information, CPC representation was part of the original proposal. However, that didn't come to be. And I would be willing to bet that the committee would consider having CPC representation in the future. I just would like to say that the information that this study will provide to us is vital for long-range planning. We have gone as far as we can right now. We need this information to continue with long-range planning. That's been the buzzword at town meeting. Let's have a vision, let's plan for the long term, and that's what we're trying to do. We can't go year to year not knowing what our space needs are, therefore not knowing what our capital needs are. So I'd encourage you to go ahead with this motion this evening.
Mr. Goodwin, please state your name and address, sir.
Bill Goodwin, 16 Emerson Road, North Reading. I'd like to have somebody from the Finance Committee answer a question for me, please.
Ask your question, sir.
As I understood, we're at 30,000 in the red. We get 15,000 more. We'll be $45,000 in the red. Where's this money going to come from? Stabilization fund.
Does the Finance Committee wish to enlighten Mr. Goodwin? Mrs. Vaca.
If this money comes from stabilization, it doesn't put the budget out of balance. It's transferring it from stabilization.
It's not here here from the stabilization fund. There's nothing here for 15,000. It is not included in here.
Mr. Goodwin, the answer you got is that there is sufficient money in the stabilization fund to transfer these $15,000 out of it into this article.
How can we be, excuse me, Mr. Moderator, how can we be $30,000 in the red already? We're already in $30,000 in the red. That was explained a couple of meetings ago. It was written down. It should be in the minutes of their meeting. In fact, the Finance Committee themselves said it.
Just a second.
You will get your answer in a moment, Mr. Goodwin.
The balance of the stabilization doesn't affect the budget. If the budget is out of balance, we can still have a positive balance in stabilization. That's why it's being transferred. I'll get the amount. The stabilization account has $326,000 in it. We're transferring $15,000 from that amount into the budget.
Now, I mean, I know we put $250,000 from the Hillview into the budget. We had $134,000 in stabilization, and we've been taking money out of stabilization left and right. And I don't know where all this money is coming out of stabilization. Probably somebody else in the town meeting here might be able to help us. Thank you.
Well, we put the $250 into this account, so we had a balance in stabilization. And we've been drawing from it, but we still have a balance in stabilization. That hasn't hit zero.
Mr. Hernandez.
Right.
Mr. Hernandez.
Just like to remind people that what we're doing tonight is not setting up goals or objectives for the space study. All we're doing is telling you is that if we're going to get the best